Welcome to the Lava Fantasy Football League. This is the Week 17 recap, the Championship Edition. Alright, so since it's our final one, we're trying to go big. I made a drink that I've never had before. This is called the Neptune's Wrath. In here, there's like lemon juice, simple syrup, gin, and absinthe. And here I have chartreuse. The trick is, I have to light the chartreuse on fire, so hopefully we don't have any accidents. I may not light it on fire. There, it's on fire. You can see it. And with it on fire, you pour it in. Oh, that looks crazy. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. It's a pretty nuts drink, actually. It's like some kind of gin sour, but with some fireworks. Well, that's pretty nice. I think a lot of the flavors, though, are not things that I really like a lot. Like absinthe is pretty licoricey, which isn't my favorite. It comes through just a hint, so it's not too bad. It has the sour, has the sweet, and it has the gin fragrance, and then it has the caramelized green chartreuse, which is a pretty strong liqueur. So, let's get into it. I think I was pretty salty over the weekend, I won't lie. And I think most of you know because it's been the biggest thing on the news cycle. The Lions got robbed by the refs. Never mind some of the other headlines like the fact that Philadelphia lost again. Never mind the fact that Baltimore looks crazy because they just absolutely destroyed Miami. And a bunch of the other things, like there's some really nice storylines about rookies getting healthy and coming back. But nope, it was the referees and it was the Lions. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but I did want to kind of just mention like what happened, right? So the Lions, they began with it was a close game, and it went from Dallas kicking a field goal, getting a 7-point lead. Lions got the ball. They turned it over with an interception. And then this set up Dallas to mismanage the clock, giving the Lions like a minute and 30 seconds about to finish out the game. And they do. They come. Boom, boom, boom. Big play after big play. Just destroying Dallas's D and shredding them to the point where they get an Amon-Ra St. Brown touchdown, setting up a game-tying field goal. But nope. Dan Campbell said, when we get the ball and we score, we're going to go for two, setting up this crazy, crazy play. Look at it. Taylor Decker gets the game-winning touchdown. I mean, granted, there's 23 seconds. But that gives them the lead. It's huge. But here, look. There's a penalty. A penalty called. Said illegal touching by number 68. And the controversy of this whole thing was the Lions did everything right. Look how mad Dan Campbell is. He's pissed off. They set up this play perfectly. Everybody's in the right spot. Taylor Decker leaks out. Gets that touchdown. Well, 2-point conversion or whatever it is. But the issue, though, was the reporting. Here's Dan Campbell. He says, I told you before the game, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have 68 report. And he goes, nope, 70 reported. But it's so weird because when you look at the replays, they have these other views of it happening. They have Penalized and they have Taylor Decker approaching him, right? Look how pissed off look how pissed off number 70 is. Here's Goff. Goff tells number 68, go report. So he's going to go report. And then here, look at this. Look who approaches the ref. It's Penalized and Taylor Decker. Taylor Decker tells him, I'm eligible receiver. 70 comes late and he's gone. And then so what he does is he tells Dallas 70 is the eligible receiver. People complain it was an illegal formation. It was illegal because the referee called the wrong guy as a eligible receiver. The what happened was he was Dan Skipper was the ineligible receiver, but he declared him eligible. He lined up at right guard. That's already illegal formation. Taylor Decker lines up at left tackle, which can also serve as the legal receiver if the receiver to his left is off the line, which he is. So they did everything right. The only problem was the ref said that 70 was the eligible receiver and 68 wasn't. But that was not the case. Look at it, right? We'll just replay it again. Look how quickly he just ignores them. He goes and tells him, hey, I'm the 58 is the legal receiver. And then 70 comes, he goes, yeah, I got it. You ever see that with someone when when you want to make sure they get it right? Like, hey, I need you to get this right. He goes, yeah, I got it. No worries, I got it. And he gets it wrong. That cost the Lions seeding, right? The the culprit of it all, I mean, was just human error. You can say that they would have covered 68 if they knew he was an eligible receiver, but you don't know that. They always do this. They set this up time and time again. I don't want to get into it too much. There's a really good breakdown by this YouTube channel called That's Good Sports. He's a Denver fan, but even he breaks it down exactly how the thing came out, showing how the Lions got screwed. Uh, and he also has a really good video called The Most Unfairly Penalized Team Ever, Detroit Lions. As a Detroit Lion fan, not surprised that it happened because this is historical. And that shows you everything from the Calvin Johnson rule to the picked up pass interference call against that happened against Brandon Pettigrew in a playoff game against Dallas again. I'm done with it. But being used to it, you know what? That's why, as a Lions fan, what we have learned is you cannot trust the refs. You just can't trust the refs. You just have to play better than the team that's in front of you and better than the mistakes that the refs made. That's all it boils down to. And it's true because the Lions had a couple things, right? Dan Campbell didn't kick a field goal at the end of the game that would have made this a moot point. They would have had 3 extra points, so they just kicked the extra point, and they're up. They're already up by 3. Maybe it changes the course of the game, but that's 3 extra points. And then there was another instance, that big 92-yard touchdown pass to CeeDee Lamb that was crazy. That was on a broken play. And if you watch what happened at the line, Derek Barnes had a blitz, clear path to Dak Prescott, and that would have been a safety. That's a 9-point differential. But he just turns away from him, and he disappears, and Derek Barnes goes, where did he go? And then he just shows up, passes it. CeeDee Lamb, whose quarterback, who's covering him, falls down, leaving an easy touchdown, making a difference in the game. You can't make those mistakes and then leave the game in the hands of the refs. But anyways, check out that guy. That's Good Sports. Pretty good. It's pretty funny channel, so it's really good. So check it out. Anyways, enough of my long rant. Take a sip. So let's get into the games, right? We had like 4 teams that were on bye, so we'll just cover their scores just so you can highlight how their players, we'll point out some players and some interesting things in there. Richie didn't play. He was already in 12th place, and that was what he had was the highest score of the week. So Richie did a great job. If you take a look at everybody, Lamar Jackson just completely destroyed Miami. 38.74 fantasy points. He had 5 touchdowns passing. Didn't need to rush that much. He only had 35 rushing yards, but 321 yards and 5 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb was the other one. A lot of that is buoyed by that almost 100-yard touchdown pass. But he was unstoppable. 34.8. He had 227 yards and a touchdown. Stephon Diggs didn't do too much. David Montgomery was okay. James Conner had a big time game, and that was also part of the upset that destroyed Philly, having all kind of question marks there for the Eagles if they're actually going to succeed in the playoffs. Trey McBride had a solid score. Deontay Johnson was okay. And then for his kicker, solid. And his Buffalo defense strong, 17.9. Buffalo did pretty well against New England. In terms of that resulted in a score of 166.24, which is good for the best score of the week. So it's kind of funny. Although Richie is last place, his final week where he wasn't playing had one of his best games of his season. And he did. And then if he adjusted his lineup, there's no adjusting the lineups. His best ball score, like say for instance, you moved Deontay Johnson in the place of Stephon Diggs, who didn't do anything, and then that gets you a plus 4.4 points. And then you move Mixon into the flex spot where Deontay Johnson was. That's plus 9.2 because Mixon had 18.8. And then Kincaid actually did better than Trey McBride. So he got these two rookies who are going to be big time going forward. And if he does all of that, right, starting Johnson, moving Johnson, Deontay Johnson to Diggs spot, bench Diggs, start in place of the flex position Mixon, and then he puts McBride over. I mean, it doesn't really matter. He put Kincaid over McBride, and his best ball score is a 182.74. So, would have been super scary if he somehow made it to the finals. One of the interesting things I want to point out, though, that kind of makes a difference is he made some moves. I don't know when you made these moves, Richie, but you grabbed all these defenses. You played the right defense with Buffalo, but look who else is on his bench. He got Cleveland and Denver, and that makes a difference, right? Because one of the things that you change out for the games that matter is you swap out defenses, and so by grabbing additional defenses and stashing them on his bench, he diminishes the pool of talent for defenses on the waiver wire for the matches that matter. But good job to Richie that week. He had one of the best scores of the week. He was the top scorer, and it could have been even higher. Mike L was the 11th place player. He didn't have a game last week, but let's look at some of his scores. Gardner Minshew was okay. His other quarterback on the bench, Russell Wilson, was benched, and there's a whole bunch of controversy about that, about him being benched because of pay. And it's kind of weird, honestly. Devontae Adams had a big time game. 13 catches, 126 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Huge game. Let's use the pen. Justin Jefferson had an okay game, 8.4. Kyron Williams, though, totally balled out. And I'd like to just highlight him. We'll draw a circle around him. Let's do some effects. Kyron Williams, look at this. 31.10 fantasy points. He had 20 rushing attempts, 87 yards, 3 touchdowns. And on top of that, he had 2 targets, 2 catches, 14 yards. And then the question with Kyron Williams is he going to be a top 3 back? Because, since he came on, he's part of the reason why the LA Rams are a dangerous team going into the playoffs. And like I said before, I was not high on him coming off the draft, but he's making me eat my shoe by just being dominant and consistently dominant. Kyron Williams is crazy good. He also had Devin Singletary did a decent job. Dallas Goedert is healthy again. Remember, he got injured, but he's back and healthy. Put up a nice score. Amari Cooper was a late scratch, so that's an understandable 0. We already talked about Wilson. Brandon Ayuk is another solid score from him. And then Cooks. Also part of that tragic game to me. As far as best ball scores for Mike, maybe you take Cooks and Ayuk and replace Justin Jefferson and Amari Cooper. If you played. But obviously you don't. But those are also not that obvious. Next up, we have Prince Lama Eric. his final score for whatever this lineup was, obviously not adjusted, was 101.94. Dak Prescott was part of that game where he was good and bad. He was good enough to win and limited the mistakes, even though he did throw a pick. But it was enough to beat Detroit. Rashee Rice is wide receiver one for Kansas City. That's clear. The problem with him is he's not like elite like Tyreek Hill was. T. Higgins disappeared. I think he may have gotten hurt. Derrick Henry has also been a weird letdown. Taysom Hill finally showed up. He needed him earlier in the playoffs, but he was a no-show until only now. Aaron Jones did solid, and then look at the bench. Big time scores from Jake Browning, Najee Harris. Zay Flowers also finally showed up. Terry McLaurin, decent score, and Tajay Spears, not that much. What interesting is Pittsburgh has a late surge, right? You look at Najee Harris having 26.9. Look at Jalen Warren having that 19.0. Start them both. And that's a weird trend. Like, if you look back beyond this year, but like the last 3 years, Pittsburgh is good at the end of the year. Well, it's like they have these moments where they're like, "Oh man, should we blow this up? Should we fire? Should we fire the coach who's been there forever?" But then at the end of the season, they always do well. So that's an interesting trend to take note of for future seasons. Ultimately, for Eric, his season was kind of boiled down to decision making. It was always a decision between deciding who to start between Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. This week, you start them both. Actually, and then the prior week, prior to last week, I think they did well. And then also he dropped guys and teams and players, and then they would blow up after they dropped him. So the decision making was just a little bit off for Eric. I think he just has to maybe pay more attention to the teams. And then I just want to highlight one guy. You know, he was a first round running back for so long. How are we going to treat Derrick Henry going forward in 2024? I don't know. Maybe if he goes to a new team, it's just you're at that inflection point, right? Where you have an elite back who's able to put up close to 2,000 yards, who's unstoppable, and then they hit the wall and then they just disappear. Is Derrick Henry at that position? So that'll be a big question mark going into the draft next year. All right. Our next non-game player, Darren, he had 112.32 fantasy points. Mahomes just didn't do too much. Actually, his scores across the board is kind of pretty meh, with the exception of Jonathan Taylor, who had 19, right? He had 96 rushing yards, and he had a rushing touchdown. Also a good play by Justice Hill, who had 24.04. He had 48 rushing yards, three carries, 5 receptions on 64 yards, and he pretty much dominated the production, right? So, like we said, they destroyed Miami 56-19, and it was largely because of Justice Hill. And that does impact like other games, because for the games that matter, they did have Baltimore players. They just don't do as good because Justin Hill is taking all of it. Darren Waller did a decent, excellent tight end score. And his biggest winner is Harrison Butker. He kicked butt. He had 28.2 points. Off his bench, his defense was 0.9 and 7.2. So one of the things I do want to highlight, though, is this kind of reinforces our decision to make it a 17-week season for fantasy instead of taking the full 18 weeks. Because if you look at Christian McCaffrey, even though he had 12.2 this week, notice he's out next week. And so that would have been critical. Like if Darren was in a championship game and then San Francisco has the season wrapped up, they got the number 1 seed with 1 week to go, they're not going to play him. Why would you play him and risk injuring him? So he's going to be out. So I think that kind of reinforces the fact that we're going to continue on with a 17-week season. So that's Darren. All right, so now let's get into the games, right? So we have the ninth place game. This is Brad versus Aaron. I don't know if Aaron bothered to do anything with his lineup. I understand that's understandable, but in this case, Bradley wins 116.5 to 81.7. Just in general for Aaron, what's interesting is he has really good quarterbacks, right? Justin Fields, 28.32. On his bench, Jordan Love, 31.04. Even CJ Stroud came back and is healthy, and then not much for a score, but we're happy that he's healthy again. And he may be just trying to come back to get that Rookie of the Year award before Puka Nakua takes it from him. But across the board, just a pretty much poor job from the rest of his skill position players, and then pretty mediocre from the special teams. For Brad, most notable is A-Chain, who's healthy. This is the kind of scores that he had before he got injured, right? 170 rushing yards, a receiving touchdown, 30 receiving yards. Mostly because Mostert was left out. And the other one I want to highlight is Isaiah Likely, who's really productive. He was also a big part of the game besides Justice Hill. 2 receiving touchdowns on 2 catches, both for 42 yards. So I don't know. It begs a question, right? Because Andrews is a premier tight end, but if they can get production from a guy like Likely, do they really need Andrews, who's also on the older side? So you start to see those guys trending out. Pay attention next year. Like, is Andrews going to come back to that top 3 tight end form? Something to think about when it gets to the draft next year. The next game was the 7th place game. This was Gary versus me. Gary wins 125.36 to 105.54. I finally turned into a pumpkin. So, like I said, had I made the playoffs, I would have made it to the championship game, but this would have been my final score. Actually, I'm not sure because this lineup has been the same for me through the entire playoffs. I have not touched it. Ever since I missed the playoffs, I left the lineup as it is. So I may have tried harder, but based on what I'm seeing, it would have been tough for me to get a win. If anything, swap out this defense, which is giving me negative zero point 0.1 points. Maybe that helps a little bit. And then maybe starting some of the guys off the bench. The most notable guys is Brees Hall doing well. Sam Laporta just killing it towards the end of the game. Groupie having a really good kicking game. We already talked about what happened with Detroit. Off the bench, Pickens has been part of that turnaround. And Tyler Argill had a solid game too. So I don't know. I don't know if I would start them. I would probably stick with the Detroit guys, but maybe a little few, and maybe I get better. But like I said, I turned it into a pumpkin this week, and I only ended up with 105.54. For Gary, really good game from Jacoby Ford. Look at that, 26.3. And then the most notable one for me, because his bench is pretty sad, is Puka Nakua, 16.4. 118 receiving yards, 5 receptions, 19 rushing yards. And it begs the question, right? Is Puka Nakua the top 3 wide receiver next year? Because of he showed up, he just like showed up on the scene and he continued it. You gotta give him a big time credit for that because sometimes you can catch defenses by surprise, but once you put your game on tape and defenses can game plan for you and you still continue to produce, that's a big time receiver. So Nakua, huge stock up. He was the biggest surprise this year to me, even more than CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud maybe would be higher if he stayed healthy, but that's another thing. Availability is valuable. And then the last thing I want to mention about Gary's team is Travis Kelce. What happened to him, man? He had 16 receiving yards off of 3 catches. They had the win, but again, just like we said with Mark Andrews, are we seeing the downfall of some of the older receivers? Or is he going to come back and just ball out like some of the older wide receivers that we saw this year, like we saw with Mike Evans and like we saw with the San Diego receiver? I don't know. But it's it's a big question for next year going forward for Kelsey. And then we have the third place game, Morgan versus James. Morgan pulls this one out in a close battle. He was helped big time with Etienne coming back. Etienne had 26.4. He had 2 rushing touchdowns and 102 rushing yards. So those were some of the big time games that helped Morgan to like build some win equity to get into the playoffs. Etienne kind of like faded down the stretch, and then he's back for this third place game, helping him get this win. Another one is Njoku, who had a big time game. Ever since he came back from burning his face, he's been great. So he's another tight end who has stocked up. And then Walker too. Ever since coming back from injury, this is like what we saw before the injury. He's kind of back to form. And then the most interesting thing off the bench, the surprise is Joe Flacco, right? Here's another old guy who has helped the Browns get into the playoffs and who are considered contenders for the Super Bowl. That's kind of wild to me. Herbert too had a really good score, but consider the fact that the Jets, I believe they had Flacco. They had Joe Flacco. Maybe if they play him instead of Zach Wilson or whoever else they have, Trevor Siemian, I don't know who else they had on that team. Maybe they are set up for the playoffs for Aaron Rodgers to pull off that crazy, wild, back faster than ever Achilles injury. But it never happened. Jets failed. Flacco is now in Cleveland. He's the third or fourth starting quarterback, and he got them into the playoffs. What a great story for old man Flacco. For James, he falls short. Part of the reason is Tagovailoa. Actually, this is a decent score, in spite of them getting smashed 56-19. The other one I want to highlight though is Cooper Kupp, and then we really sang praises for Nakua. So there's a big question mark, right? Does Nakua take over for Kupp? It's an interesting question. I think it's a matter. I mean, to me, they're both going to be excellent receivers because they have Matt Stafford, the Kingmaker, who makes wide receivers look amazingly good if they have that chemistry with him. Now he has 2 of them. So it might be a matter of just pick your poison, right? If you shut down, if now Nakua gets all this attention, then Coop can go off. So I wouldn't be worried too much about them. But it is an interesting question. Would you take Nakua over Kupp? AJ Brown is another one on his team who there was a time when we were singing his praises, but Philadelphia has gone downhill and AJ Brown's production has gone downhill with it. And then Deebo Samuel is probably the biggest nice it's opposite, right? So as AJ Brown went down, Deebo Samuel got healthy and he just balled out. He has some big time games. This is actually one of his lower scoring good games. But it's remarkable because he's top 5 in average and in the league. So he did a great job this year. Congrats to Morgan, you are third place. James falls to fourth. That brings us to the final. Brownsville Jets versus Jeremy. If you watched the game in real time, it wasn't that easy for me because I saw my Lions get robbed on Saturday. But I paid attention to Red Zone on Sunday just to see how this final played out. The game was close in the AM games, the early games, the 12 p.m. games or whatever on the East Coast. And it had them going kind of like back and forth if you paid attention. But when it came to the PM games, Jeremy just pulled away, and it wasn't even close. Jeremy put up a big lead, 139.76, and Mike was down bad, but he had one player left for Sunday Night Football, and that was Chandler. Maybe if the game was closer, that Sunday Night Football game would have been more interesting to put it all on the shoulders of Chandler. But he was already 30.99 short. He was able to get 8.90, but he needed 30.99 more to pull off a win for Mike, which is the kind of player that you need to do that is someone like a Christian McCaffrey, right? But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And for Mike, he was hurt this week. And it wasn't that he fell down to earth, but it was that a lot of them underachieved. And that's a tragedy for a championship game for Mike, right? So starting with Devontae Smith, only getting 4.5. I remember seeing a big, long throw and catch that was dropped. That would have helped because that would have gave points for Hurts and Devontae Smith. Hurts was another one who didn't do too much. Even though he had 3 passing touchdowns, they didn't have those things where they end up at the goal line where they can do the tush push and give an automatic 6 points to Jalen Hurts. Him rushing a touchdown is more valuable than him passing a touchdown because it's 6-4. You know what I mean? And then just across the board, not just Devontae Smith, but outside of DJ Moore, his receivers on his bench didn't do too much. And then the tight end let down. You remember TJ Hawkinson got injured last week. And that was a big blow for him because that would have helped a lot. One of the other things he did he had Cortland Sutton, who was a solid guy who he had to drop and replace with Romeo Dubs, but even he didn't do too much. And then for him, at the very least, maybe playing a Okonkwo over Komet because Komet gave him a donut in a critical championship game, but that only gives him plus 4.9 points. So, Komet, yeah, fix that, right? Fix Komet. What could Mike have done besides that? You know, even the receivers. Like take a look at Devontae Smith. Romeo Dubs scored less than him. That's the only other receiver on his bench. In terms of best ball, maybe you play Gus Edwards on his bench, 13.4. Edwards over Barkley. You know what? I missed something. I made some calculations, but I missed something. Kyler Murray actually 27.6 over Hurts. If he plays Kyler Murray over Jalen Hurts, that's an additional 4.9 points. That's kind of crazy to me. You know what else is funny? You know what? We'll just do that because it's going to be a what if scenario. Jalen Hurts has a plus 4.9% point differential. You know who else a plus 4.9 differential? If you play Okonkwo over Komet, also 4.9. Maybe your best ball scorer if you just replace Komet and you replace Edwards over Barkley, or you replace 2 of 3, right? Let's replace Edwards over Barkley. That gives you plus 4.9 also. Your best ball score is 118.58. If you replace all 3, it's 123.48. Still not enough to catch Jeremy at 139.76. He would have needed to have done something else, right? I'll give you a couple scenarios. Take a look at the tight ends on the board. Juwan Johnson had 19 points. If he had so happened to pick up Juwan Johnson and get 19 points, that helps. But that still keeps him short about 7.08. What if he replaces someone off of waivers on Devontae Smith? He would have needed anyone who had made more than 11.58. So look at this. Bo Melton, 19.5. Mike, you're a Giants fan. Slayton had 18.6. Wan'Dale Robinson had 17. There's also Julio Jones at 16.4. Dortch had 15.82. Trey Palmer, 15.4. Jalen Reagor. I don't know if you're doing that. These are not that obvious, but any one of those would have helped you if Jeremy stands pat to maybe catch a win. But those are not that obvious. But good job getting this far, Mike. You just fall short at the end. And that leaves us with Jeremy. Jeremy wins this. And why did he win? Well, because for one thing, his wide receivers were overpowered throughout the season, even into the end. Hey, chill out. He had guys like DK Metcalf, Tyreek Hill. He had Keenan Allen. His receivers were crazy good. And then he was fortunate. He found DeAndre Swift, who just started to ball out. Raheem Mostert, was a big time guy, even though he didn't play in the ending. So it's been crazy, you know. So as in terms of Jeremy, he had super strong wide receivers in a year where it's clear that the premier skill position is wide receiver over running back. But that's not all. He also had to choose from an abundance of wide receivers, and he largely chose right. Thankfully, with the draft, auto pick was great for him. But I'm not going to give you an asterisk, Jeremy, even though auto pick was really, really good to you, because you did have to make some moves in the playoffs to get this done, right? There was special teams. One of the big time changes that helped you late in the season, in the playoffs actually, was picking up Dicker, who gave you like this crazy 20-point game. And then in this final game, another big one was you dumping Miami and picking up Jacksonville. Critical move, because look at Jacksonville. They gave 20 points. So that's a big time move to help you win this championship. And then remember, there was someone like Richie who was picking up defenses, thinning the amount of possible defenses that you could pick. But you happened to choose Jacksonville, who had a shutout of Carolina, giving you 20 points and a clear victory. So, congrats to you, Jeremy, for winning the 2023-2024 Halal Fantasy Football Championship. Great job by everybody. We had a good time this year. We'll see you at the draft, maybe sometime in August, maybe September. And I'm pretty pumped for next year. All right. See ya.